Today, I invite you to reflect on the curious story of Jairus in Mark's Gospel. And I call it curious because it is interrupted by another story. Para ba siyang tinapay na merong tuna spread sandwiched in between. At yung palaman in between is the story of the woman with hemorrhage. There is also a contrast being made in our gospel reading between two dispositions. You have Jairus on the one hand, in a state of panic. He's rushing Jesus, practically dragging him along to get him to lay hands on his daughter, who is critical. I imagine Jairus pushing and shoving the crowd on account of his daughter's emergency situation. And yet you have, on the other hand, Jesus, who comes along with Jairus, but suddenly takes time to stop and to check who it was who touched him. You know, the storyteller sets Jairus aside. Sinantabi muna siya for a while to tell us what it was that caught the attention of Jesus. And when later on he goes back or gets back to Jairus, abay desperado na itong si Jairus because his situation has grown from bad to worse. It is when Jesus stops and pauses a while in the midst of this emergency situation that the narrator is introducing another character, yung palaman. Wala siyang pangalan. She's just called a woman who was suffering from hemorrhages, meaning bleeding, for 12 years. The same number of years as the age of the daughter of Jairus. Unlike Jairus, who has been introduced as an important character, synagogue official daw siya, who is feeling entitled to Jesus' full attention. Very explicit pa yung request niya, lay hands on my daughter so that she will get well. The woman who is bleeding, she's not even calling attention at all. She's not even asking for an appointment or a special time or opportunity to be prayed over. Sabi ng author, naubos na daw kasi yung pera niya sa pagpapagamot. And maybe, kaya sumingit na lang siya. She did what she did because she thought na kung makikipag-appointment siya, baka ma-charge pa siya for a special attention to be given her by this healer. Ang tingin niya kay Jesus, a doctor. Wala na siyang pambayad ng serbisyo. So what does she do? She decides instead, sisingit na lang siya to inch her way through. Instead of asking Jesus to touch her, she touches Jesus. Baliktad. She touches Jesus, believing that she would get well if only she could put her hand, even just on the hem of the garment of Jesus, kahit laylayan lang ng damit niya. In the meantime, si Jairus nagmamadali dahil emergency situation. He is hoping against hope that Jesus would reach his daughter just in the nick of time. Unfortunately, he is delayed. He is delayed. At yung delay could have been avoided if only Jesus did not bother to ask kung sino ba yung humawak o humaplos sa kanya. Bakit pa napaka-big deal? I can sense na yung storyteller is deliberately making the reader feel the desperation on the part of Jairus And the same desperation that would crush his heart nung dumating ang balitang patay na ang anak niya. Wala sa gospel to, pero ako, I use my imagination. I imagine a mix of anger and self-pity that overcame Jairus when he got the news. Nung una, halos kalad ka rin niya si Jesus. Pero ngayon, he suddenly freezes in shock. And I'm sure he started melting down in tears. And this time, baliktad na. It is Jesus who will persist and give Jairus the assurance, hindi pa tapos ang lahat. I imagine Jesus this time taking Jairus by the hand and saying to him, "Do not be afraid. Just have faith. Manalig ka lang." Ang kabaliktaran ng pananalig, in English, is despair. Ang paghihinagpis. You know, despair comes very often with a tendency to isolate yourself. In desperation for their loved ones who suffer, kung minsan yung mga tao, they have the tendency to be insensitive to the sufferings of other people. I imagine Jairus silently bearing a grudge. Palagay ko, nagalit siya kay Jesus. Kasi ikaw nagpa-delay ka pa Sinabi ng emergency Ayan, patay na tuloy siya. Ano ba yung big deal? Ba't ka nagpabalam? Why should it be more important to you to know who touched you? Why should that be more important to you than the life of my daughter? Kahit yung mga disciples, they found it curious. Why it mattered at all for Jesus to know sino ba yung humawak o humaplos sa kanya. Ang dami namang mga taon naggugumguman, talagang nakikipag-unahan, pressing in on Jesus from everywhere. Pero, from the perspective of Jairus, there was nothing else that mattered at that moment except his daughter. It was totally irrelevant or even inconsequential for him that a woman who had suffered quietly, a woman who had waited for 12 years, at that very moment was going to find one single opportunity for a healing encounter with Jesus. Palagay ko, mayroong tinuturong aral si Jesus kay Jairus. And that is why he deliberately delayed yung paglalakad niya. I think he was teaching him the virtue of patience and the capacity to bear with other sufferers, with other fellow sufferers. Kasi pag nagdurusa, akala mo ikaw na lang sa buong mundo ang nagdurusa. Like I said, it can make you insensitive na meron din palang other people who are also suffering. The act itself of waiting in patience, all these years for this woman, for this one single moment, yun ang susi sa pag-asa ng babaeng ito. The key to hope. Ano yung susi ng pag-asa? The capacity to wait, to be patient, to hold on, to endure till the very end. Alam nyo, these are typical expressions that accompany all the Psalms of hope in the Old Testament. We have many biblical characters who have become icons of hope for having waited and waited all their lives for the fulfillment of God's promises. Si Abraham, for example, father of many nations, pero wala siyang anak, ni isa. He had to wait. Moses, he would lead Israel for 40 years, and yet hindi siya papasok sa promised land. Or the old man Simeon in the Gospel of St. Luke. Ang ganda nung eksena nung pinresent yung batang Jesus. I am sure he was crying, and in his tears, ang sabi niya, "Now I can die, O Lord, because now I have seen the fulfillment of your promises." Ewan ko ba kung bakit inimbento nila yung English expression, hoping against hope. Maybe what they really mean is that hoping is not about giving in to despair. For as long as you have God in your company, even when things seem to go wrong, for as long as you have the Messiah next to you, how can you give in to despair?